Hi, friends. Welcome to the God and My Girlfriends podcast. We are so glad you're here.
Hey Liz, welcome. It's so good to have
Buddy.
you.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. I'm excited to chat.
Yeah, and we have Marsha's dog in the background
I
too.
am
There's
so
Buddy.
sorry.
Wonderful.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Okay. Pause this 1 minute. Okay, I'm going to put him away. Buddy, no. Come on, buddy.
Of course. There's always something, right?
I know. It's incredible.
I feel like I tell this story too many times, but we were doing an interview, Esther and I, for our podcast, and my son was like he was 2.5 or 3, and he shoved a bunch of toilet paper in the sink of our bathroom and then turned the water on and flooded the whole bathroom in the middle of this interview. And normally I was like, I would have them on the iPads and I had it down to a science and everything was fine, and he just decided he was bored and just flooded the bathroom.
No.
So you just never know.
Gosh.
You never know what's going to come up when you're trying to record, right?
I know. Life. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine.
All right, so we're going to start over. You ready, Marsha? All right, let's just start over. Then you don't have to edit that out.
Okay, that'll be good. Welcome, Liz. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Oh, we're just really pleased to have you here, and want to start out just so listeners can get an idea of who you are and what you're doing now. So give us a quick synopsis of what you're up to.
Oh, goodness. Well, my main thing right now is I have a podcast with my co-host called the Deconstructing Mamas, and my real passion right now in life is just normalizing, like deconstructing faith, and as a part of the faith process, not as this sort of separate thing. I mean, obviously people do end up deconverting, and there's all these different ways that we deconstruct. But I wanted to normalize it as a part of the faith process for people who want to stay in the faith. It's okay to have questions and it's okay to wonder. And as a mom of 2 little kids, I have now taken that question to, like, what do we do now with our children, right? When we have taken a different path than our parents took when we were raised in the faith, like, what does that look like now? And so, that's my passion, and that's most of what we're doing on the podcast, and what I'm doing on my social media pages is just kind of like chatting about that and trying to create a space for, like, myself and also other people who are in that same position of who just need support. Like, sometimes the good thing about social media is that we can find support sometimes for people who we wouldn't normally be able to, like, see in real life, which is
Absolutely.
a really wonderful gift, right? Because not that many people in, like, my little town that I live in are in the same deconstructing faith space that I'm in, but there might be people sprinkled all over, right, that are in this position, and we can communicate through social media. So that's been kind of cool. But yeah, that's sort of it in a nutshell, I guess.
We know a lot of people obviously going through deconstruction. A lot of them are a little older, and I was surprised to find you on Instagram, and I was like, oh, look, she's a younger girl that's deconstructing too. And then I found out that Pete Enns was your father, and I'm like, now what does she have to deconstruct from? But I listened to a little of your story, and maybe you can fill that in. You didn't always grow up with your dad being such a progressive theologian, correct?
Correct. Yeah, I get that question all the time. People are like, "Oh my gosh, you must have had, like, the best faith experience because, like, your dad is deconstructed," and it's not so, actually. And my dad and I actually just did a joint interview on this for a different podcast that's probably coming out sometime in the spring, where we talk a little bit about this, because I think my dad had some of his own questions and thoughts about what things were happening for him and his faith, but he wasn't really sharing them with us. So we were going to church and we were getting this, like, Calvinist kind of education about God as young children, and that's what we were absorbing about God, and we weren't really hearing about my dad's questions or things that he might not have agreed with. It was just sort of like, oh, well, this must be what it is, and no one's really talking about it. And then as I got older, we shifted more to, we went to an evangelical church, and I got purity culture, like, big. And so there was not really any deconstructing happening in my home until probably I was in high school. And by that time, like things were really like set. Like I had like the stuff that I had learned and the stuff that I believed was like really set inside of me for better or for worse. And then my dad started openly deconstructing more, and I started openly deconstructing more. But I mean, to be frank, like the damage was done. Like
Mhm.
I had already been through it. And
Mhm.
so yeah, so it's wonderful to now have a dad who, you know, is in this faith place that I am. That's really, really wonderful. And I do not take that for granted because I know a lot of people have lost relationships, you know, with family members
Mhm.
because of this. And I've had kind of my fair share of that too. But I'm really thankful that my dad and my relationship, you know, our faith relationship has sort of like grown in this space. But yeah, it wasn't always like that. And so there's still a lot of pain that I have from my upbringing.
I know you've talked a lot in other interviews because I've listened about being diagnosed with an anxiety disorder at a young age. How old were you when you realized that you had anxiety?
I was 8, and it came on like kind of fast and intensely, and there might have been like some other factors going on around that time that I'm like kind of unsure about or hazy about.
Mhm.
You know, like, but yeah, it came on pretty quick, and I was 8, and so I've like largely had anxiety my entire life. And I always kind of say like I don't think that, you know, my religion was the cause of my anxiety, but it sure didn't help. You know, I don't think it was like the only thing. I think I'm predisposed. I think there's some generational trauma. You know, there's like all these different things that kind of come together, right?
Right.
But I don't think that my religion really helped. I think it kind of did the opposite, and created more anxiety and more chaos and less trust in myself and less grounding of myself and less of these things that probably could have really helped me, to have been more of like a fully functioning person in society. But
Mhm.
instead we kind of like went the other direction where it just got worse and worse.
Mm.
um and I do think that, you know, my religion did have some play in that. I think that there was
Yeah.
a lack of awareness.
Do you think that because I have some anxiety issues as well, and my two of my three children have bad anxiety, and when you think about when you actually sit back and think about some of the stories we're told as young children, and I remember as a young child being very anxious about, oh my gosh, if I don't get everything right, I'm going to hell. And if people I love don't get everything right, I'm going to hell. And I would lay in bed and have, yeah, anxiety over that as a young person. And so and I didn't have a full-blown anxiety disorder, but there was a lot tied to it. Just was confusing as a child. How could a loving God condemn us to hell if we don't get everything exactly right? And I can imagine that would be maybe the stepping stone into your own deconstruction a little earlier. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think there was just a lot of stuff that didn't add up for me
Mhm.
from like a very young age. And my dad remembers like questions that I asked at a young age. Like he said that I think all my siblings and I had just a lot of questions, because it just didn't really make sense to me that God was unconditional love, right? And yet it was conditional because if you don't do these things, you burn. Like it
Mm.
didn't make any sense to me. And so I was really, but this is what I was being told by people that I
Mhm.
trusted, right? And by people
Mhm.
that I was spending like every Sunday, right, in this and Wednesdays and whatever other days, right? You're in this place and these people are telling you this, and it felt like the only option. I felt
Mm.
like if I wanted God to be a part of my life at all, I had to believe all of this doctrine. And so it was I think it was a very confusing time for me. I think I really learned not to trust myself because what myself was telling me was like, this doesn't really make sense. But then what everyone else was telling me was like, no, but this is what you have to do. Do this, do this, do this, do this. And so it was a lot of confusion. And I think it wasn't until I went to a small Christian college and I really started to notice there, like, wow, I don't really believe a lot of this stuff that these people do.
Mm.
But it wasn't until I left there, where I started feeling a little bit more freedom to really start asking those questions and pushing back on some of those things that I believed. But I was in an evangelical church up until like COVID hit.
Really?
Yeah. I couldn't let like that last piece go. I felt um very like out of place, and I had a lot of anxiety about going to church on Sundays, and I just was sort of unsure about where my space was there, but I couldn't really let go of that. And then COVID kind of was that natural, right? Like I know I hear a lot of people talking about how
Mhm.
it's just this natural, like, you know what, actually, like I'm not sure that I really need this space right now, or I'm not
Mhm.
sure this is really good for me. And around that time I had a newborn baby and my daughter was 2. And so I'm thinking about like, I don't feel comfortable sending them to Sunday school. I don't feel comfortable that they learn some of this stuff from, random people that have volunteered for Sunday school, without degrees in theology. And, I just didn't feel comfortable with any of it. And so, but up until then, I was sort of like towing the line between two spaces
Mm.
for a long time.
Mm.
And a liminal space.
Yeah.
So this leads well then into your podcast, because your podcast is all about being a mom and deconstructing. So tell us a little bit about deconstructing mamas.
Yeah. So that it's been something that was in the back of my mind for a while. And I knew that I wasn't going to be able to do it by myself. Like I knew that um, I was a new mom, 2 little kids, like just losing my mind, but really felt like this space was going to be really important for me, and that I knew other moms needed it. And Esther, my co-host, and I met through her daughter. Her daughter and I used to go to the same church and we're friends. And so during COVID, we were all in a book club together, and I don't really know how it came up. I ended up like mentioning that this is something that I've been thinking of and kind of like dreaming up in my head, and felt like it was a much needed space. And Esther was like, "Oh my gosh, I would love that. Like, I would love to do that. That would be amazing." And that kind of started the whole thing. And Esther has been, I mean, she's an amazing co-host. I literally could not have brought that dream to fruition without her. She has just tons of gifts, and just was really willing to like hit the ground running with it with me. And so that's been a really wonderful space. It's been really healing for me, because I'm finding all these people who feel like me, finding all these moms who are healing from trauma, right? Trying to figure out their own faith, trying to figure out how to raise their own kids differently, trying to figure out what to do about the God thing with their kids. Like there's so many of us, and we didn't really know that others of us existed. And so it's been a really healing space for me. And just really cool. So we're in I guess season 5 now of the podcast, and it's been great. It's been really great. It's also kept me like out of just like stuck in mom mode.
Mm-hmm.
Like stuck in sort of that space where I'm like, oh my gosh, like I'm doing this again with like Spidey, and I'm making yet another lunch for somebody who wanted their bread cut differently, and all of those things. Like it has helped to keep me in this space of like, oh, this is what I'm passionate about, and this is who I am, and this is really what I love to do. And so I still exist outside of all of that.
Oh, I love that. How old are your kids now?
6 and 4.
6 and 4. I
Mhm.
had a friend that was a stay-at-home mom, and her kids they were probably about maybe a little younger than that, but she said she was at the post office standing in line, and she accidentally dropped her keys, and she was by herself, and she went, "Uh-oh," when the keys hit the ground, and she goes,
Yes.
I need some friends. I've been in the house with the kids too long."
It's
And she
so
said it was
true.
just like, "Oh my gosh." Yeah. So she said, Can we go to lunch? I need to talk to an adult." So yeah, you can probably get really wrapped up in that. And I know my grandchildren are 2 and 4, and my daughter-in-law is a stay-at-home mom. And yeah, it just feels like just keeping them alive every day. But I love that you're finding something that you're passionate about that you can do as well, and keep alive, for you, because you're you. You're not just the mom. I mean, being just a mom is good too.
Right. Right. Yeah. There's
But
other things. Yeah.
there's other things. But I had started going to a church actually right before. I had not been in church for years, and then found a church here in Nashville where I lived, a progressive church, and uh, had started going right before everything shut down, and then it was just kind of hard to get going again. But a lot of the young moms were saying the same thing. It's like, I don't know how to parent. I don't know how to, like, I don't want to teach my children all the same things that I learned in the way that I did. So how do you teach them about God in a healthy way? And how do you have these conversations in a different way? And I know that they've been working on that. And so I can imagine that your podcast is an amazing resource for young families that are struggling with this. Because like you said, there's a lot of them out there, a lot of them.
Yeah, there's
Mm.
so many. And I mean there are a lot of resources too we're finding, right? Like we're interviewing these people and we're like, "Oh my gosh, so glad we know about you now," because there are a lot of resources. They're kind of like sort of hidden a little bit, and because this is still sort of like a growing space, like a growing niche, right? And so it's
Mhm.
hard to sometimes bring everybody together, but we're sort of trying to do that. Like, okay, this person does this. If you need this, here's your person, like, and try and connecting people because everybody has similar needs but different needs in this space, right? And
Mhm.
so yeah, it's been a cool space, and I just my hope is really that people can just like find healing. I mean, it's really really hard when you feel like you've lost a limb, when you sort of move away from the faith that you've always known. It's really really hard, and then to do that while you're also like trying to keep humans alive every day and doing all of those types of things and managing meltdowns and trying to stay regulated, like it really is so hard. um that I want to bring myself hope, right? And I want to bring others hope too, that like, you're not alone, and so many of us are doing this, and we're gonna get through it. And on the other end, we're gonna have a generation of kids who are gonna be doing really great. We
Critical
just have
thinking
to like,
skills.
yeah,
Yeah.
yes, just some things that maybe like our generation's missing a little bit, right?
So as you think about, the people you've met, and you said the resources are just kind of coming together, you're finding pockets of resources out there. What are maybe the top one or two things that and resources that you find yourself utilizing or recommending the most?
Yeah. I point people to Meredith Miller a lot. She recently wrote a book as well, but her social media she talks a lot about kind of this space, like how to talk about, for people who want to talk about the Bible with their kids, or for people who want to kind of approach these things, like how do we do that age appropriately? What do we do with Easter? Like what do we do with Christmas? And Sarah Schwartzentruber, she's another one who's very similar. And some of us need that like tangible, like, okay, here is what you do, here's the curriculum, right? Like we want someone to tell us what to do because we really don't know how to do it. And so she's really helpful for that, and so I point people to her a lot. I think in the bigger thing that I've found in this space is that like when we meet our kids like most basic needs, that's a very important stepping stone for all of this other stuff. And I think, when we were kids, for the most part, growing up in these high control religions, we were missing these sort of basic things that we needed, right? Like we needed to know we were loved by God, not loved by God if XYZ, right? Just loved by God, period. We needed to know that we were safe, and those two things actually weren't clear, like people argue with me all the time on social media, like, well, what do you mean you weren't safe? Like God is safety and God is love. And I'm like, yes, but what about all of these things that we were also told? That doesn't feel like it to a tiny little developing brain. And so we have to understand where our kids are developmentally for any of that stuff to really matter. So no matter what you believe, I think, no matter what you believe from a faith religion standpoint, those developmental needs like have to come first, or your kid's not really going to be able to understand anything that you're telling them. And so I've like in my own kind of life, and I know a lot of people wouldn't agree with me, and that's fine. I don't always know if I agree with myself either, but I've kind of bypassed like the Bible with my kids. Like we just aren't doing any of that. My kids like have a vague understanding of who God is. My daughter's really into Jesus right now, which is like really cute. Like she just
Aw.
loves, like, she loves the idea of Jesus. She is so intrigued by like this guy who has all these holidays that are about him. Like she's just so interested. And so we do have these conversations, but I'm not sitting down with a storybook Bible and reading about Noah and reading, I'm not doing that. Because one, it's traumatizing for me, which is also important, right? Like, don't do anything that's going to re-traumatize yourself when you're
Right.
trying to do this with your kids. So it's traumatizing for me, but also knowing my kids, I just think they'd be confused and scared. They're also anxious little humans, and so I just don't think it would work for them. So the things that we do are just like basic developmental things, right? Like autonomy and like grounding, understanding the world around you, like just things that really don't have a ton to do with faith on like the surface, but underneath it often leads to these deeper questions. And my hope is that if my kids are kind of fully functioning humans who, aren't run by anxiety and all these other things, then they're gonna see God like very different than I did as I was growing up. They're gonna have like that chance, I guess, to find God for themselves.
Yeah.
Definitely more. Oh, go ahead, Marcia.
Well, yeah, no, I was just thinking, you touched on something a minute ago, Liz, too, about, we were taught not to trust our own feelings. We were taught that, um, or if our feelings were contradictory to what some theology was telling us, that you always went with the theology. You didn't trust yourself. Human human emotions are flawed and you can't trust them. And a friend of mine is, yeah, she's trying to approach it more with her children about actually trusting what's inside, that God is inside them, teaching them
Yeah.
that God is in you, and that little voice in you that tells you, you're loved is God, and to trust those feelings. Do you find that, do you resonate with that?
Yeah, that's a really beautiful way of saying it. And I think that is largely, I guess, what I'm trying to do. I hadn't honestly really thought about it like that. I think about that in my own life, right? Like I talk about how God is inside of me and how, you know what I mean? But I hadn't really thought of that. But I do think that that's ultimately like what I want them to understand, that it's
Mhm.
not like this sort of separate idea, but the idea of self and finding themselves and finding their soul is what really is going to connect them to God as like the divine. So I love that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because we were taught all about dying to self, right? The whole, you know, if you anything internal felt selfish to me. It was just all about external. And so yeah, I imagine there is a whole different way of looking at things when you're trying to raise kids in a way that you're not repeating like bad theology that you were taught.
Yeah. I mean, I think in some ways too, I've talked to friends about this, how, when something's hurtful to you or you've been traumatized, sometimes you sort of swing the other way, and
Hmm.
that can feel also extreme, right? But there's a
Right.
piece of it where it is a little bit necessary in order to come back to the middle. And so I think that in some ways, like I've swung to this sort of other side of the pendulum where I'm like, I can't do the Bible with my kids. I can't. It's not that I think that nobody should, and it's not that I don't think that you can't do the Bible with your kids. I've just swung here because I can't. And the hope is that maybe we swing here and then we can kind of come back to the middle at some point, like as I'm healing, and as I'm learning and growing. And so nothing that I'm doing is like, this is how you do it, like everyone needs to do it this way. It's hard because, like you said, so many of us don't trust ourselves, but in this process it's like, just trust yourself. Just know what you need to do for yourself and your kids and believe that it's gonna work out. You know what I mean? But that's so hard when you're like, no, I need a formula. Someone please hand me
Yeah.
a formula. What's the formula for this? It's so tricky.
And I think that's why the community is so beneficial, because you get to interact with others who are finding their own individual way, yet still able to affirm one another and support one another that way. So that's huge. Um, you have to interact with some people online that don't believe that deconstruction is a good thing. And certainly there are a lot of uninformed people who talk a lot about what deconstruction is and they have no idea, but it can be pretty ugly. So, in kind of preparing for today's conversation, I took a look at your Instagram and found that you do have conversations with folks that come in just to start an argument. So, tell me a little bit about how that feels for you. And you're certainly role modeling how to interact with people like that. So, how's that working?
Yeah, I actually have been surprised at my ability to have boundaries with kind of haters on the internet, to be honest. I wasn't really sure how that would go. And for a little while, like I would get a few here and there. Obviously, I've dealt with that in my personal life. Like I do have, former friends and people who have now like said, we're kind of done with you because of where your faith stands. And so I have dealt with that on a more personal level, but I wasn't sure how it was going to go on on social media, and especially in the recent months things have gotten pretty ugly. Someone called me like the one day like a troll, like I should go under a bridge because I'm the weirdest looking person he's ever seen or something like
Oh
that.
my
And
gosh.
some of that is just like you're just like, what are you doing? Like what, like why, like what do you think that's doing for anybody? It's just like a weird comment. But some people, I mean, they really come back because they really do believe that I'm wrong and they're right. And which may be true, I don't know, like, you know what I mean? I don't want to fall into the sin of certainty on in any way, right? Like I'm just saying this is where I am, this is what I believe. If other people believe the same thing, welcome to my space. If not, you know what I mean? Like go along your merry way. I do at times I will come back with like my own biblical interpretations, like if someone like puts in a Bible verse, like Matthew or somewhere in Matthew, and they're like, well, this, and I sometimes will kind of pop back with my own opinions or thoughts or say, well, this is actually the interpretation that I follow, or this is how I now know this to be interpreted, or whatever. And so sometimes I'll go back and forth, but I find that to be like largely like just not productive.
Mhm.
So usually I will just comment like, wow, looks like you've got it figured out then, or like, or good for you, or sounds like this isn't the space for you then, and like, it's just like, okay, great. Then like move along, this is a space that some people do need, or, people will say like, oh, well, no one cares, and I'm like, well, there's some followers that care. Like there's
Yeah.
some people that care. You're actually wrong, So
Mm.
it can be really dicey. I try not to get too caught up in it. I mean, sometimes you can get frustrated with some of the things that people say. But I try not to get too caught up in it. I try to just like focus on like, okay, like I'm not doing anything for these people. Like these aren't the people that I do this for. These are actually the kind of the opposite, I do this for people who want to heal from people like this.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I don't know. I don't like have any like short and fast rules about it. I just kind of I try to really trust myself. Like, like what do I feel like, what do I feel like I need to do with this comment? Do I want to have some sort of response? Do I feel like this person is pushing back, but they're respectful enough that I could maybe respond in a certain way? Or do I feel like this person is just going to be unkind and I need to just walk away from it? So some people I don't respond to at all. So yeah, but it's a crazy place. Social media is a wild place, and everything that I do is on social media. Like social media is like, I mean, that's what it is for me. Like we do the podcast, and then like everything we do that we've put out on social media. I'm not
Mhm.
blogging right now. And so like everything that I share is on social media. So like I kind of had to figure out how to do it. But some weeks like I'm largely not on social media for, a few days at a time if I feel like that's what my body needs. So I don't know. I just kind of roll with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's that sounds like good self-care of listening to yourself and going, you know what? I can't do this today. I'm gonna play Legos today or whatever you need to do for yourself and for your state of mind. Cause having that kind of stuff, I was looking a little bit at some of the jerky things people say. And well, I guess you're not a Christian then. If you believe that, it's like, oh, you can decide if I'm what I am. You can,
Weird.
you get to decide if I'm a Christian or not. I don't think so. And I'm thinking, golly, that would send my anxiety through the roof if I had all
I
that.
know, it is shocking. Like it is shocking as somebody who is like largely very anxious and
Mhm.
but I think I do think I've come to a place where I really do feel like very grounded in where I am with my faith. And I do think that has made a little bit of a difference. I think there was a time where I was still really insecure about what I believed,
Mhm.
and some of those things would have been really hard for me. I would have felt like I needed to have a response for everything to kind of validate where I was and who I am. And I think I'm just in a more settled space with that. So
Mhm.
not that it doesn't, not that I don't think that people are wrong, because we all think that at sometimes, right? And things that really do irk me is when people start to talk about like women and how women
Mhm.
shouldn't be speaking up about things, or how those that does really start to get me. And in some ways just sort of shocks me that we still like have some of these beliefs around women.
Oh,
um it can be really it saddens me. It saddens me, but um it also confirms my deconstruction journey. I'm like, well, this
Right.
is why I'm doing this. So
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, it's again, you're a role model. You're role modeling what women in particular have a hard time with as they come out of, I work with women who come out of communities that are dysfunctional or marriages that are dysfunctional. And one of the first skills and the hardest skills to learn is how to stand up for yourself or how to detach in situations where it's not necessary to tell your story, and you don't owe anybody that. But how do you get around it, and how do you stand your ground and practice healthy boundaries? So just wanted to thank you for role modeling that, because I'm sure that's a skill that you're teaching. You may not even realize it.
Oh man, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I'm qualified to teach it, but I'm working on it in my own life for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
are you attending a church right now?
I'm not. And for many reasons. I mean, I've always been really drawn to a faith community like that.
Mhm.
So I do think I'll find myself back in a church at some point. I think that I'm not really sure, I think, where I fit in still on this Christian journey. And so it would have to be a very specific church, I think, to feel really like I could be myself, because I'm no longer willing to compromise that. Like I
Mhm.
need to have a place where I can be myself. So I
Mhm.
haven't really stumbled across anything like that. There is a local church that I've been thinking about going to. Um, but for more like logistical and personal reasons, like I have high anxiety, like new places like not something that is
Yeah.
really easy for me right now. So in some for some more less faith-based reasons, I guess I just have not visited. So, and also having two children, and like so it just hasn't happened, but I'm not opposed to it. I think at times I think I even really long for a faith community that I feel like I could really belong in.
Mhm.
And I believe that they exist because I talk to people on my podcast all the time that are a part of those communities. So I know that they exist. I just haven't found it.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been bouncing around too. I grew up Southern Baptist and had a little stint in the Church of Christ, and then was in a non-denominational mega church for a while. And, with each little part of my journey, at one point I just went, I can't do this anymore, and didn't go to church for about 8 years, and then started trying to tiptoe into the right place because I missed the
Mhm.
community aspect of that. And I just can't go back to a church where a church says, in order to be a part of our church, you have to ascribe to this set of beliefs.
Right.
I need a church where they're willing to let you be where you are, on your journey. And we're not all going to be in the same place. And a church where we can talk about questions and doubts and not feel like you're shut down. And especially with women, a lot of times they feel like women don't have the right to speak up or say things are right or wrong in the church setting. And so it's a lot. I mean, I've been bouncing around to Lutherans and Episcopals, and I mean, but I just haven't found one yet. So I'm on the same journey with you. And it's nerve-wracking to go like walk into a brand new church and like, I'm here. Hi.
Yeah.
No, I feel like I almost need to just like hand everyone like my social media and be like, check this out. If you're on board with it, let me know. If you're not on board with it, let me know so that I know whether I can actually be myself here or not. Not that everyone has to agree, right? Like, obviously, like, not that everyone's going to always agree, but like, is there a space for me to be this person here
Mhm.
or is there not? But the church that I have been considering is actually an Episcopal church.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it's largely because my dad goes to an Episcopal church. And I remember like many years ago when he first started going there, I remember him telling me that the Sunday school classroom like on the wall was just like a timeline of like the Bible based on like historical events. And I was
Mm.
like, "Oh my gosh, that's so cool." Like these kids were actually learning like you know what I mean? Like what was happening in the world when this was happening? What like they were actually like learning useful information, not just random stories like all kind of like shuffled around. And
Yeah.
I always thought that was so so cool. And so it's kind of been in the back of my mind like oh that's like kind of what I want for my kids, you know, like the information without indoctrination, right?
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
so,
Mhm.
yeah, I don't know. We'll see. Maybe one day, but for now, having slow Sundays and feeling like I can connect to God in the ways that make sense for me right now to connect to God,
Mhm.
that's been more important for me.
It feels like just your whole deconstructing mamas, like the podcast and everything. I'm sure you're developing a little community around around your podcast. Have you ever considered like doing like a deconstructing mamas weekend retreat or something for like young moms to come and have some
Yeah.
community?
Yeah, we have talked about that. And I feel like probably that's something that we will end up doing in the future.
Mhm.
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
because yeah, I think it would be really cool. I know there's some other like deconstructing communities that have thought something similar. So it's like, you know, do you come together and create something?
Mhm.
You know, I don't know, maybe. But I think there's a good chance.
Yeah, I just
Yeah.
love seeing other women helping form faith-based community, whatever the faith is, a faith-based community where it's outside of the church. I mean, that's what we do with God and My Girlfriends, just a place where no matter what you believe, no matter what, it's like we're just kind of here to support one another as women. We can talk through different ideas. We had a book club recently, and there was Catholics. There was my Jewish friend came. She doesn't even believe in, she's not even a Christian. And she was fascinated at what she learned, and we were fascinated by what she learned, and she even did, it was around the spring, she did a Seder for us, and we all got to experience a Seder, and
Oh, that's
I
cool.
just think that is so cool to be able to really be in such a community where everyone's willing to, like, just learn from one another and be what was it? Somebody said the other day, be, curious, not furious. Be
Hmm.
just learn about what other people believe, and so anyway, I just encourage you as a younger girl there that has obviously some really cool leadership skills to just keep those keep those communities going because they're really needed.
Yeah, that's cool to hear you say that. I know that, you know, and people do message me often and they're like, "Hey, like, you know, people who live, you know, within like an hour or two of where
Mhm.
I am, you know, who are like, "Hey, do you ever do a meetup? Do you ever do this?"
Yeah,
And you know,
mhm.
that kind of stuff. And I always like write back and I'm like, "We're kind of working on it. We're trying to figure out like how would that work?" And the question for me is always, you know, we had a lot of opportunities to grow and there's been opportunities for me to, you know, go to different events. And the question for me is always like, how do I balance, you know, like what I need as a
Mhm.
young mom who's healing from trauma and
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
like what do I need while also having this you know, large passion for this community and wanting to like foster these relationships so that, you know, we can all kind of learn and grow and heal together. And so there is like a little bit of a battle inside of me of like, you know, like what's
Yeah.
what, you know, but it is always kind of working in the back of my head. And I do feel like at some point something like that will come to fruition.
That's cool. I think that's cool. Yeah, you've still got little ones at home. That's your season, it's one thing we talk a lot about with God and my girlfriends is you have to really recognize what season you're in, and then that will help you prioritize things because sometimes in certain seasons, yeah, you can prioritize your job or your family or whatever, but you're definitely with young ones at home, you've got your hands full just I can't believe you're even doing a podcast with two kids at that age. That's impressive.
Yeah, we figure it out. My daughter, she's in kindergarten, but she's only half day. So we are around each other a lot, and we kind of make it work. I mean, they've kind of gotten used to it. I mean, they were little when the podcast started, so it's
Oh,
like
good.
mommy has an interview, and everybody grabs their iPads and their headphones, and they find their spot. And other than the
The
time my
toilet
son
paper.
flooded, yeah, other than the time my son flooded the bathroom, it's gone like fairly well. So
That's awesome.
I guess I've got to give them some credit too. I couldn't do this without them.
Oh, that's sweet.
Well, I'm interested, Liz, if your today's self could go back and talk to you when you were young before you started this journey, what would you have to say to her?
Oh my gosh. There's so many layers to that for me. There's so much just really hard, heavy stuff from my background. Um yeah, my gosh. I think in terms of like a religious viewpoint on that, I would say I really would want younger me to know that like God is already with me. God is already here. God is
Mhm.
already within me, right? And everything that I thought was true about God like is. Like all that, those kind of like little nagging feelings that I had about like, well, what if God is like truly loving? Like, what if God is really, really loving, or what if God is this, or what if God is that? As I've journeyed into deconstruction, I have found that like that is a possible truth. Like where I once thought that that wasn't because it wasn't what I was being taught in
Right.
church. Now I'm realizing like actually there's a lot of like really educated people who are saying that actually is a really great possibility that God is actually that way.
Mm.
And I didn't know that. I don't think I had a clue that it was possible. And I think it led to a lot of feeling really hurt by God and feeling really betrayed by the whole system. And so if I could just go back and tell myself that, um, I wonder if that would had shifted anything, but it might not have because as a young person, you're just trying to fit in.
Mhm.
You're just trying to do what everyone else is doing and what everyone's telling you to do. So would I have really been able to, branch off into my own space and really believe that God was who I thought they were? I don't know.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah, a lot of layers.
it
Well,
is. It's kind of a bittersweet journey, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. It is a bittersweet journey. I sometimes look back on like journal entries from, I don't not like 5 years ago. And I'm like, what was I writing? Like, like I mean really like things like I mean, I think there was still even a belief system in play like when my kids were really young that like good things were gifts from God, right? And bad things were lessons. Like there was still that belief system and so there was like hard things that were happening and I'm like, okay, well like God's just trying to like teach me patience or and I'm just like like looking back on that, I'm like, my gosh, that was not that long ago that I still like, even though I would have considered myself to be deconstructing at that point, I still had these like very locked in belief systems
mhm.
that like everything was sent from God. Like, not that like life is hard, life happens, God is with us regardless, right? Not that, but like
Mhm.
every single thing that happens in your life is because God has an agenda with it. And that was like that's very exhausting, especially for someone who has anxiety. I also have diagnosed OCD, which is probably the bigger issue for me, I would say.
Mm.
But like for someone to be telling you that, you're just like, oh my gosh, I can't win. Everything means something. That's like the worst thing that you can tell someone with OCD. Like
Yeah.
everything means something.
Mm,
Everything means
mm,
something, and you have to be on top of everything. And so it's just really interesting to look back on not too long ago and
Mhm.
to see how some of these like thoughts really had a hold on me and to see how I wasn't really experiencing like true peace and freedom in my relationship with God because there was still all these like holds and checkpoints. And it's funny, a comment that I get a lot is like, you just want to be like living in sin, and that's why you're deconstructing. And that always is so hilarious to me,
Oh
because
gosh.
my life is like the least debaucherous life that you could like imagine. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, really, like, and it's just and deconstructing is hard. Like, it's a hard journey. It's not the easy journey. Like, it it's for people who like just can't sit in what they knew anymore, but it's not for people who are like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to do whatever I want. It's like for people who are like, no, this isn't true to me, like I have to do this. Like, most of the people that I talk to who are deconstructing like got to a point where they didn't have a choice anymore.
Oh
Their
yeah.
entire being was like screaming out like that they had to go on this journey.
Y-
um
Yeah, I don't know a single soul who said, I'm just going to choose to deconstruct everything. I mean, it sort of just happens to you, when you start following, when you start, like Stacy said, when you start using a little bit of critical thinking here and going, okay, wait a minute, this this is not making sense. And then as you start peeling back the layers and peeling back the layers, it's like you get to a point where, I mean, for me, there was a point where I wanted to go. I want to go back. I want to go
yeah.
back to where I thought I had every figured out, because everyone loved me back in that in that circle, and it felt safe, and I knew a casserole was going to show up at my house if I got sick, and all this stuff. It is scary to like have to, but I knew I couldn't go back. I had peeled back too many layers. There was what you can't unsee what you've seen now. It's like, this makes so much sense.
Mm,
And so, yeah, no one, I don't think anyone
yeah.
decides they want to tear down their entire belief system one day and pick it apart. That's just something but I also don't know anyone that has regretted doing that. Like, it's been hard, but they're like, yeah, I'm starting to see, it's all starting to make more sense, to me now. And so, um, just thank you for the work you're doing, for speaking out, for having the thick enough skin to deal with all of the people online, and continuing to put out content that I know is changing lives, and with your podcast and with your social media. And so, yeah, just thank you for the work you're doing. Keep it up. We're rooting for you.
Thank you, that's so kind of you.
Yeah. Well, as we wrap up, Liz, tell folks how they can find you and um, anything you have going on or coming up that you want us to know about.
I'm like across social media as Lizz Enns Petters. So you can find me. It's two Z's, which is always
Tuesdays.
confusing to people. Yeah, it's always confusing to people. That was like a middle school thing. I don't even know, but I stuck with it. So it's two Z's. So Lizz Enns Petters across social media. The Deconstructing Mamas is our podcast, and our social media is the Deconstructing Mamas. And yeah, there's a cool thing in the works, but I can't really talk about it yet. So I'll share that when I can.
Okay.
Just another resource to help parents who want to give the Bible to their kids but don't want to destroy them in the process. So excited about that. But yeah, largely I'm just here and there doing like little writing projects. So the best way to connect with me is just to follow me on social media. I'm a pretty big message answerer. I usually answer all my messages at some point, unless they're just evil, you
Yeah.
know. But I love to connect with people in the way that I'm able to with two little kids, which is largely like, I have a minute, I'm gonna go on and respond. So you can find me there, and I'd love to connect.
Well, thank you. That's how I found you. That's how I just DM'd you and said, hey, will you come on the podcast? And you were like, sure. So thank you for being willing to join us. And thank you for the work you're doing. And we hope to stay in touch.
Yep, sounds good. Thank you so
Bye,
much.
Liz.
Thanks.
Thank you. She was adorable, wasn't
I
she?
know. I just think she's so courageous,
Mhm.
and is such a great role model.
Mhm.
For me, when I started deconstructing, I hadn't even met you yet. So
Right. That's right.
um, I think you and I both kind of had that story. We were just trying to figure it out on our own
Yeah.
and looking for resources, but not really finding much. And then just really putting the pieces together by paying attention to posts that people are making and realizing, oh, because you can see it in other people. Once you
Mhm.
felt it, you can see it. So I just am really grateful that she's out there and pretty easy to find and having these conversations. Um, that's really inspiring.
Yeah. And again, like for younger girls that are deconstructing, I always think about people a little older that are in the deconstruction world, but there's clearly some young ones out there too, and I'm excited to see the community that she builds around all of that. I know that there's a need for it, and I'm glad that she's out there. And yeah, we'll put all the links so you guys can find her. And you guys, we're going to take a little summer break. This is our season 4 finale. I forgot what
Yeah,
season we were in.
we need fireworks.
We do. I know. Maybe I can find some sound effects around here to
Sound
add.
effects, yeah.
Yeah, so but thanks to everyone who has joined us for all these really awesome conversations this season, and for all of you guys that have listened and have left us reviews and comments, and y'all keep doing that. It'll help us as we continue to grow this podcast. And y'all have a great summer. Stacy, have a good summer.
Yes, you too.
We'll
I'm looking
talk.
forward to, yeah, to
D-
getting restarted at some point down the line with some excellent guests. So if you're listening and you want to be on, or you know someone you'd like to hear more from, let us know, because we're building out our schedule now for
Yep,
next season.
yep. So everyone have a great summer, and we'll be back soon on the God of My
Soon.
Girlfriends podcast. Bye,
Bye.
everyone.